Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be making cheesy scalloped potatoes. And if you're like me, the first question that popped into my brain when I found this recipe was, wait, what's the difference between scalloped potatoes and au gratin potatoes? Aren't they the same thing? I always thought that they were the same thing, and one was just the French way of saying it, and one was like the American way of saying it, but both refer to the same thing. They're not the same. They're very similar, but they're not quite the same. So I have the definitions of each. And a scalloped potato consists of sliced potatoes layered in a casserole dish and baked with heavy cream or milk. And an au gratin potato are a classic dish of thinly sliced potatoes baked with cheese, butter, cream, herbs until tender and bubbly. Obviously, just like the wording of those definitions, I found them in different places, so they're not super consistent. But the big difference to me is cheese. Obviously, there's like the herbs and spices and stuff that are in the au gratin. But that, to me, is more of just like chef's preference. Like if you're making something and you want to put like Italian seasoning in it, that doesn't really feel like you've made a different dish. It feels like you just spiced it differently. Putting cheese in something versus not, that feels like it is now notably different. Now this recipe kind of highlights a beautiful thing that I love about cooking, where you can do whatever you want. If you remember the definitions, these should probably be called au gratin potatoes because they have cheese in it. But, I mean, the woman acknowledges this in the recipe. I'm not just like making this up. She liked aspects of both. And so she liked the thicker cut of the scalloped potatoes, but she wanted cheese in there. And so she just combined the recipes and made something new. If there's a thing in a recipe that like after you've made it, because I encourage you, like the first time making a recipe, just make it how it's written. And then after that, kind of do like a little like retro, think about it, be like, what would I do differently? And then you make it differently the next time. You've now made a recipe. That's how cooking is. It's like you take these like base ingredients and then you combine them in different unique ways. And so you making a variation of an existing recipe is now just a new offshoot of that. And it's just so cool. It's a cool thing that I like. And this recipe is an example of that existing. And obviously at the end of this, I'm going to have things that I would change about it, which then makes it another recipe. and then after you hear that, you might be like, Eric, you're an idiot. Do this instead. Now that's a different recipe. All right. This recipe also takes 90 minutes to cook. So luckily I already have it done, or else I would not be having this much banter. I would be like, one take, we're done. Scalloped potatoes, we're getting to cooking because it takes 90 minutes. So in honor of that, we're going to stop rambling and we're going to run through the ingredients and get into cooking. Potatoes, an onion, butter, flour, salt, milk, cheddar cheese, and pepper. The first step is going to be to cut up the onions and the potatoes. Now, this all would be a lot easier if I had a mandolin. I could just, set it to the right thickness, slice through all of them, everything would be the exact same. But I don't, and I hardly ever need one, so I just am never gonna purchase one. The goal is just, consistent, same thickness. I feel like I can manage that. It'll take a little bit longer, but, stay focused, you should be fine. I also threw in another onion because my potatoes are from Costco and they're huge. And instead of using fewer potatoes, I just figured use another onion. This definitely won't cause any other issues at any other point in this recipe. The next step is going to be to lay out the potatoes and the onions. So in an 8x8, we're going to do every other. So it's potato, onion, potato, onion. It took me a little bit of time to figure out the strategy of kind of holding it all pinned down with one hand and then adding with the other and just kind of moving your hand forward and keeping that going so that everything kind of stays in line and doesn't just fall over. I also found out that my Costco potatoes brought another issue of I now have just too many and they didn't all fit in the 8x8. So I had to bring in another dish. Honestly, I probably should have just done a 9x13, but I did not think of that at the time and I had already kind of made the one. So hindsight 2020. Now it's time to make the cheese sauce. So in a medium saucepan, we're going to melt the butter on like medium-high heat and then add in the flour and the salt, kind of stir that up continuously to let it, like the roux cook for about a minute. And then we're gonna slowly add in the milk, still constantly stirring. And then once that's all incorporated and thickened up a little bit, we're going to then dump in all the cheese, stir that until it melts down and becomes a nice thick sauce. And now we're just going to pour the cheese sauce over the potatoes and onions that we have in our casserole dish. And I'm going to realize that I should have made more because I have more than just an 8x8. And I'm going to quickly make another batch of cheese sauce and then pour that so that everything's covered in cheese sauce. Finally, we're going to bake in the oven at 400 degrees for 90 minutes. And at the end of that, we're going to then turn on the broiler and then let it develop a nice golden brown crust on top. So here we have it. It smells fantastic, so why don't we see if it tastes fantastic? So obviously, I mentioned it at the beginning, this takes forever. So this is not an ideal weeknight meal, but it does taste really good. So I will be making this again. It's just gonna be kind of hard to figure out like when I'll make it. Like it feels a little bit more like a weekend activity. I did kind of go into this with the thought process of I might make this for Thanksgiving, but it is a big time commitment in cooking that on the day of Thanksgiving with like that 90 minutes of oven time. If I had 2 ovens, maybe cooking it the night before and then reheating it in the oven, that might be the move. Very good recipe, so I will be making it again. And it does, as I'm eating it, it has very similar like memory activations of homemade mac and cheese. I think it's just the cheese sauce because I feel like that's almost the exact same thing that you would do if you're making your own homemade mac and cheese. You would just pour over cooked pasta instead of potatoes. So I think that's kind of triggering some of that in it, which then makes my brain then connect to like barbecue. So I feel like next time I make some like pulled pork or something like that, making this with there, that'll be really good. I'm excited for that. That'll probably be like how I'll actually make this in the future, as this will be like my potato side for like a barbecue dish that I'm making, or even like barbecue chicken, something like that. Anything I think with like barbecue sauce, I feel like would pair well with this, just because it has like that kind of like homemade cheesy vibe, and then has like the char and like the subtle onion flavor coming in there. All just blends very nicely. The one kind of point that I would dock this for is the seasoning. Obviously, you put a little bit of salt when you're making the cheese sauce, but the very last step of the recipe itself, like if you read the recipe, says to salt and pepper, like to taste, which it's just kind of came out of the oven, it's baked, there's a crust on it. So if you put salt and pepper on it, it's just gonna sit on the top. This should go in the cheese step. Like when you're making the cheese sauce, that's when you should be put a little bit extra salt, a little bit of black pepper, and that's where all the, like, if you're adding seasoning, like flavor to this, that's the step to put it in. Not at the very end where you're just sprinkling on top, unless you're trying to just do like garnish of like, oh, here's some parsley to make it look healthy because there's green on it. If you want flavor to actually be throughout the dish, you need it to be incorporated, and that would require you doing it at like the cheese sauce step. I mean, it's still really good. It's just definitely a little, like there's like a little blandness there that I'm detecting, but like the cheese and all that has very good flavor. There's just like a little, just usually like some's missing a little bit. And I think that could be easily solved by doing that. And then obviously, like if you want to take it like the next step, you could be putting in some like oregano or whatnot to kind of match like the au gratin process where it talked about like herbs going in there. I feel like that also add that to the cheese step, and then it'll be incorporated through. But overall, solid dish. Like really no big complaints. I'm just kind of, those are the only little tweaks that I make, but overall, fantastic. Very happy with this. I like the combination of the two. A big fan of cheese, big fan of potatoes. Can't go wrong. So hopefully you give this a go. Once again, it is a big time commitment, so maybe on a weekend when you don't have a whole lot going. But it's the 90 minutes is hands off. So like once you have it going, then you can kind of relax, or like I just did the dishes, because it's nicer to have the dishes done before you eat, because then you can relax after when you have a full belly. And on that note, bye Mom, still not dead. See you.